This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we bring you a dialogue entitled, Is Your Heart in the Right Place?, in which Vikram Bahal, media personality, is in conversation with renowned cardiologist Dr. Samish Srivastav.
Welcome to the national program of talks. Today we're going to talk about whether one has his heart in the right place. And I mean this literally. Heart disease is something that everybody needs to look at very carefully, considering the number of incidents around the world. And cardiovascular trouble seems to be not just a lifestyle, but also a genetic problem. But to learn more on this, I have with me Dr. Samish Srivastav, who's a senior cardiologist and a specialist in this particular area of cardiovascular health for decades now. Welcome, Samir.
Thank you very much for having me here, Vikram, and pleasure is entirely mine.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how heart disease can be detected, what are the various problems, but this is a very complex subject. And before we start the program, just a word of caution that this is a very general discussion. Problems are many in nature. It's a very complex subject, and 100 things could be wrong. And amongst those 100 things that are wrong, there could be many variations. So therefore, the best way to get it checked properly is, of course, to go to a doctor. But having said that, we're going to explore this subject to give you a general overview of where we stand today with this particular problem. Now, how bad is it?
So let me just give you a little bit of a background about heart. Basically, this is an organ which supplies blood to the whole body. And for its own functioning, it requires certain quantum of blood. This blood is drawn by two arteries, one on the right, which keeps giving off small branches, and one on the left, which divides into two huge ones. So when we are talking about coronary artery disease or heart attacks, it is these arteries in question which matter. Though there are only two arteries, but since the left artery divides into two huge ones, in common parlance we say that there are three arteries which supply the heart its own nutrition. Now, over a period of time, with age, with genetics, with smoking, so there are several factors which I'll elaborate in a while. These arteries start developing fat deposits. Now, these are deposits which over a period of time keep increasing in size and obstruct the flow of arteries. There is a time when there is a sudden cessation of this flow, and this leads to a heart attack. But till such time, the arteries are blocked. Either they are asymptomatic or they manifest with something known as angina. So first and foremost is, let's talk about angina. So angina is basically feeling of constriction, heaviness, shortness of breath on exertion, which settles down with rest. And this pain can radiate into one arm, two arms, most of the times left side, goes to the jaw at times, goes to the upper part of abdomen or in between the shoulder blades at the back side. But the question is that if there is any discomfort which happens in the chest or shoulders or arms or jaw or upper part of abdomen or at the back, which settles down readily by stoppage of exertion, take it as an angina until unless it is proven otherwise.
But there is a problem here. A lot of people have similar symptoms when they have digestion problems. And perhaps you could shed some light on that, because I believe it is the same nerve that carries the impulses to the brain from your digestive tract as well as from the heart.
So there are several differential diagnoses for angina. It could be reflux esophagitis. It could be because of spasm of the food pipe, which is known as an esophageal spasm. It could be because of gallbladder stones. It could be cervical spondylosis. The differential diagnosis is enough and more. But it is worthwhile checking out with this symptom and not to sit at home, because this is a precursor of a heart attack. So it's better to check it out rather than wait, and never ever have an ostrich approach. That since it got better with having XYZ homemade mother recipe, it's getting better, so it's probably angina. It's not an angina, but only a gastric issue, because we have burnt our fingers enough and more number of times with that.
There are some people who then try and exercise, even if it's got better, and walk upstairs to see if it returns. Is that a good idea?
That's the worst thing you can do. because what you are doing is you are precipitating another episode of lack of blood supply, which can this time be fatal. And if you look at it, never ever challenge yourself to beat angina, because we read of stories every day that people went on the treadmill, they were feeling uncomfortable, they prefer to continue it longer, that just in case it is because of something else it will go away. No, it doesn't. And neither should you try it. It's better to get yourself investigated than to have a challenge. Never challenge heart disease.
Is an ECG enough to really look at that, or do we need more enzyme tests or treadmill tests?
So Vikram, ECG is historical speech. If you have had a heart attack or you are in the process of having a heart attack, ECG will show some changes, which is fair. But a normal ECG is not a predictor for future. And that's the reason why you should not entirely depend. If your ECG is normal, don't entirely depend upon ECG, because many a times ECG is blinded to certain territories of the heart. And that's the reason why better tests are available now. In case it's not an unstable phase and it's a stable kind of a symptomatology, then you can go for stress tests. Stress tests are of several types. You can do a treadmill test, which is the basic most. Stress echo or nuclear medicine is an indirect way to find out whether there is a lack of blood supply on exercise, which is a nuclear test, which is in common parlance called thallium. And now there is yet another thing which is now available almost for about a decade, but it has matured to the level that you can really see the arteries non-invasively, which is the CT scan. It has two components to it. One is calcium deposits, and second is real visualization of blockages. So the biggest advantage of CT scan is, which is known as negative predictive value. If your coronary CT angio is normal, that means 99% of the times or 98.6% of the times you don't have blockages, which is a fair gamble to play with. So it's become a test and tool which can really see the arteries non-invasively reasonably well.
And if one has a clean ECG and he's still having some doubts, you would suggest a non-invasive step next. And if there is further doubt, then go for further investigation. So
like
it's a process, it's like angiography.
So many a times we skip this protocol. Say if you are very convinced that this is an unstable phase of angina, or the patient is in the process of having a heart attack, then we don't wait. We straight take the patient for angiography and do whatever needs to be done.
And this really has nothing to do with the general physical fitness of the patient. I believe there are fit people who look physically fit, but also have blockages, or people may not be obese, for example, but the genetics have played a role. So how important is that part of controlling cholesterol and controlling blood pressure? Because we haven't talked about the valve problem, which is related to blood pressure.
So when it comes to blockages of the arteries, there is something known as a risk profiling. So first and foremost is that we have to find out what is the risk factors the person is having. What all are the risk factors? Largely we divide them into two. One is modifiable, another are non-modifiable. Non-modifiable risk factors are advancing age. You can't do anything about your advancing age, so you prefer to call them non-modifiable. Second is if there is somebody who has had a family history of premature coronary artery disease. Again, you can't do anything about your parentage. Third is gender. So for some reason, we know the reason that women are kind of protected till such time they are in their reproductive age group. And beyond that, the moment they cross their reproductive age group, that means when they reach menopause or beyond, then they start catching up with incidence and prevalence as high as men. So by the age of 65 years, regardless of what gender they are, men or women, 1 in 3 will have coronary artery disease. But till such time women are in their reproductive age, the chances of having blockages are much lesser. Again, we call it as non-modifiable. Then there are modifiable risk factors which can be changed. Control of diabetes, control of sugar, control of smoking, control of lipids. These are stress. obesity, these are all modifiable risk factors which have to be taken into consideration. And trust me, large part of risk profiling is because of modifiable risk factors. So you control your modifiable risk factors and you can really have a reasonable, you can almost beat up with your genetic predisposition.
When you say some of these factors can be controlled, yes, but they would need early detection and medication. For example, you mentioned lipids. It may be that you are predisposed to high cholesterol or certain low density fats in your blood, even though you keep a balanced diet. Is that a possibility?
Yes, certainly, because lipid profile is especially bad in our population. Our population means South Asians. So South Asians are a group, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. These are South Asian countries. For some reason, we have very high quantum of coronary artery disease. And one of the factors is because we have very odd lipids. Odd lipids means the good cholesterol, which is the HDL cholesterol, is low in our population. LDL, which is a bad cholesterol, is high. Triglycerides, which is not so bad, is also high. So it is important that we have to discover it. Now the problem comes that it's easier to make statements like this, that you should get yourself checked. But when it comes to community, after all, it's a exchequer's money which goes to check out all these things. So what is suggested is that you have to identify again, depending upon how risky is the person's risk profiling. Say if there is somebody who has got a family history of premature coronary artery disease in the family, these are the people who should really get it done, checked out early during the course, because 1 + 1 doesn't make 2, it makes 11. So you have more number of risk factors you have, worse prognosis you have over a period of time.
And once it is discovered that you are progressing towards, let's say, a higher lipid number, then medication is important. And medication today is less expensive than what it was in the past and pretty widely available. But it does have side effects, as most medication does. So you again need proper medical supervision. You need to tweak your medication. All that requires a lot of dedication on the part of the doctor and the patient. Do you think that is something that is not as prevalent in India as it is perhaps overseas?
So there are 3 aspects of lipid control, and then I'll come back to what is prevalent in India and what is global practice, because I think it is all human beings. No human being wishes to continue medication lifelong, because cholesterol medicines are one of those, like diabetes and hypertension, where once started they have to continue for long. So avoidance is something which all human beings expect. This is human nature. But more important than lipids is regular exercising, and second is prudent diet. Unfortunately, the diet pattern in our community or in our urbanized society has been a little corrupted, so to say. When it comes to statins, yes, these are things which are needed. For some, there are set guidelines. You have to visit a doctor before you start, and it needs a little bit of a monitoring, because over a period of time your liver functions can go haywire once in a while. Though the percentage of people who will not tolerate are not very high, so it's about 6% or 5-6% people who will not be able to tolerate statins. But you have to keep it under, yes, that's a challenge.
And internationally, do you think this issue of monitoring cholesterol, monitoring what we eat, is more prevalent than India?
Well, we are a race which is at a higher risk, almost 3.5 to 4 times compared to the Western peers. So we have to be more cautious, and we have to deliberate more into insistence for need of cholesterol medicine and other lifestyle modification. Those people, for some reason, are genetically not that predisposed, so they can be a little liberal, but we can't. South Asians are a very high risk group.
There's much talked about exercise, especially when it comes to heart disease or coronary deposits of fat. Now, what do you see as the correct level of exercise? How much exercise should one embark upon? Because this is a very complex area. The moment somebody talks of coronary heart disease, the first thing is exercise, and then people who've already been discovered with a problem cannot exercise because they already have a problem. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
So optimal exercise has been defined reasonably well by the American Diabetic Association. And they said that 150 minutes of exercise per week, or if it is a high intensity, 75 minutes per week is optimal, which roughly translates into about 4 kilometers in 40 minutes, at least 4 times a week. This is optimal. Anything beyond is a bonus, but you'd be surprised, Vikram, that people who have been exercising all 7 days a week, they don't fare as much as what people do it in 4 or 5 days a week. So a gap of about a day or two in a week is something which is again considered as part of the optimal exercise schedule. But a good format to remember is a rule of 4. 4 kilometers in 40 minutes, at least 4 times a week should be good enough. If you're a swimmer, like you are a very regular exerciser and a swimmer, for people who are swimmers, they can go for swimming, they can go for cycling, they can go for aerobics, and they can go for walking. These are good exercises. The ones which we don't prefer are the ones with very high resistance exercises. Reasonably good weights to tone up your body is good enough, but heavy weights is something which we avoid.
What about high impact like running?
So the difference between running and walking is, brisk walking is that when you are brisk walking, you are on your heels first. And running is when you are on your toes or your paws first. The moment you are on your toes first, your chances of injury to ankle and knees are higher. And that's the reason when we want benefit holistically, regardless of only for cardiovascular disease, we prefer people to go for a brisk walk rather than running, lest they go for a injury to their knee and ankle, because once they have that kind of an injury, then for weeks they are laid up, and then your exercise schedule goes for a 6.
But there's also been a study that says that too much exercise is bad. So ultra-marathon running or pushing your heart and arteries to the limit and repeatedly doing so can actually harden the walls and cause more trouble.
So I will not really say that, but I completely agree with you, because I have not seen a single marathon runner who has lived for 100 years. And there have been enough and more since the times of Athens when they had the first marathon. So this is a debating point, that you can't continue to keep running at high intensity and beat up the whatever is the defined time scale for survival. But all the same, you do everything in moderation. And that is the mantra. Do everything but in moderation.
Another very important psychological point that I wanted to discuss with you is the fact that once somebody's detected with a heart problem, he seems to be rather dejected and they get very upset, and they also get a bag of medicines. So how does one tackle that? And there is also this feeling amongst people who have been detected with a heart problem that now their balance of life will be very slow. They won't be able to play sport at a certain level. They'll have to be careful. They'll have to carry their medication everywhere and always be very concerned about pains and chest pain or any other sort of allied problem that could eventually precipitate into a heart problem for them.
So fear psychosis is something which most people after acute coronary syndromes have. At least 60% people have it documented. Then depressions is almost always a rule, because unfortunately what happens is that it happens in the age group where the people are in their peak of their life. 50 years, 60 years, 40 years. And these are the people who have not achieved yet. They are one of those people who want to achieve, otherwise they wouldn't have had it. So type A personality are the ones who are the people who are more prone for it, and once they have it, then they go into a state of depression. I agree with you, because once you start medication for a heart patient, it is a lifelong issue. But the debating point again is that ever since I and you have been born, we have been eating food, which is so necessary for our survival. Similarly, you have to have food. Like the way you have food, you have to have medication for survival from heart disease. So that becomes a little bit of a communication issue. And what is required in a heart patient is that they must have some counseling sessions from people who have had it. You have to have clubs where people can share their ideas. People who have been to the Mount Everest with heart disease, people who have gone to scuba diving for heart disease, people who have had experiences of parasailing, because heart disease does not mean that you prevent anything which you cannot do, should not do. Everything can be done by a heart patient. But how to tell it across is a big challenge, because when a person develops a heart disease, he kind of gets cocooned. And then he keeps reading about it, he keeps researching about it, and that's the time when they love to read and research about only the negatives. So that is a big challenge. So you have to have clubs, you have to have advocacy groups where they kind of come out with what best can be. And not that there's no reason why a heart patient should not be doing whatever any non-heart patient cannot do.
But is there any system where you put them through that counselling, or is it something that needs to be done today in our medical area?
Well, sure enough, actually most of the people who are giving this holistic kind of a treatment in good hospitals, they have a counselor who would come and talk and be of help 24/7. That's the way the world is.
You talked of food, and that's an important factor, because not only does it contribute to some of the lipids going up, especially if you have too much fatty food, we know that. But has there been any research on superfoods, as they say, which reduce the lipids, which reduce your chances of getting coronary heart disease?
So claims are many. So if you look at the claims, you'll find almond people will have those claims, the
dark
walnut
chocolate
people will have their claims, dark chocolates will have their claims. But how much does it really translate into survival benefit? None of us know. Because why do you treat any disease for that matter? Either it should improve your survival or it should improve your quality of life. And this has not been proven beyond reasonable doubt in any randomized controlled trial. Though there are certain foods which are supposed to be healthy foods, there are certain foods. But to cut a long story short, till such time we have conclusive data out of things, I think it's just conjecture.
There has also been talk about COVID, especially long COVID, having some effect on the heart. What is your view on that?
We have seen it. We have seen young children come with blockages, with thrombus in the lungs, in the heart, and stroke. And yes, these have been seen more often than what we saw it in pre-COVID era. So I'm sure there is some kind of an association. And how to prevent that, how to do, because when it comes to community, the number of people who will have it is very little, but when we see it in tertiary hospital, we see, because there is a clustering of all these people into a tertiary care hospital, and then you realize that probably it has some implication. And yes, actually, vaccination is a must. Everybody should have it.
But you also think that people who've had COVID should go for a mandatory heart check?
Not necessarily. So now this is going to be a little bit of an issue, because when you say everybody with COVID should have it, you are putting the system into pressure.
Well, I don't mean mild COVID. I mean people who've had symptoms which were severe.
I'm not too sure, because these are things where unless we have data to suggest, it is unfair for us to extrapolate and sell it to the community at large.
Do you think that people who've had COVID and who are unhappy with, let's say, the way their fitness level is post-COVID, they should go for a heart check? Would you put it that way?
Okay, so yes, if there are symptoms which are suggestive, then don't wait, you should go. But if you are asymptomatic post-COVID, because most people have recovered completely out of it, these are the people I'm not too sure whether we should push them into getting their heart checks. Unless they have a risk profiling which is bad. That's the qualifier.
Finally, your advice that if somebody is suspect of having a heart attack, or in a situation where he's not sure whether it's a cardiac incident or not, what would they do? What should the people around him do? And if somebody has actually had it and is now in a semi-conscious state or in a bad state, unconscious state, what should they do?
So when it comes to self-suspicion, that I'm suspecting that I have got heart disease and I might be heading for a heart attack, one aspirin chewable should be taken. There used to be a thought process that people who are suspected to have heart disease should take some nitrates below their tongue. But actually it pushes the blood pressure so down at times that it is not really advisable, because many a times it will be a false alarm. But aspirin is a must, and rush to the closest place for getting an ECG and some enzymes like the troponins done. Number two is that what if somebody has fallen flat? So for this, we have to have a protocol, and that protocol is train maximum people in the community for a cardiopulmonary resuscitation. At places where you are expected to have large number of people, say airports or stations or some railway stations, those are the places where you must have AEDs. These are automatic devices which will shock just in case.
Defibs.
And these are defibrillators. So these are the defibrillator devices which are self-explanatory. All you have to follow is keep following the voice command and you will be able to do something to the patient who's dying or almost dead. So these are things where a national program should be made to train children, police people, fire people in colleges, that everybody should be taught a cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
If somebody wants to take that course now, is there any place where they can sign up?
So there are a lot of people who will do it. Most of the hospitals have made it mandatory, at least for their own staff, to learn. And for commoners, yes, we should come out with a national policy, or at least on a local basis, whether it be through a resident welfare association, or those are my random thoughts on the question which you have asked. But yes, that is mandatory, and it's a food for thought for policymakers to do it.
Well, let's hope nobody has to use that and people can prevent it even before the attack comes. As they say, prevention is better than cure. Samir, thank you so much for sharing your views, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you very much, Vikram.
Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to our dialogue entitled Is Your Heart in the Right Place?, in which Vikram Behel, media personality, was in conversation with the renowned cardiologist Dr. Samish Srivastav. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.